Here we go. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm speaking with Richard Grannon, Spartan Life Coach. And thanks for joining me today, Richard.
No problem.
And if you're not familiar already with Richard's works, he's one of the top experts, I will say, in the world on narcissism, and has hundreds of videos on topics like narcissism, CPTSD, healing, recovery, how to train one's mind for, better experience in life. So welcome, and thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Likewise. I may be a bit starstruck as we talk, because I'm sure if you bear with me, I'll get through it. Because I used to actually, in my experience of studying narcissism and learning about it, I used to fall asleep to videos by either you or Ross Rosenberg or Sam Vaknin regularly. So it's interesting for me to get to talk to both you or Ross or any of you.
That means that I've already colonized the part of your brain. I can give you post-hypnotic suggestions.
Yeah, exactly. There's already sort of like a subconscious tape which I appreciate, because it's been very helpful and very healing for me. And I'm hopeful that it is for those who are watching as more information.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, how did you get started in studying narcissism, CPTSD, and doing the one-on-one life coaching through Spartan Life Coach? What was the genesis of that?
Well, first there was a huge bang in the universe, and then everything came out. I don't know.
Started.
I don't know how far back to go. I was originally a self-defense instructor, and I had been the victim of narcissistic abuse in several relationships, and I was confused and bewildered and deeply ashamed of the fact that I taught people how to protect themselves from physical threat, but I couldn't protect myself from my own girlfriend. And after the last bad breakup I had, which was back in 2009, my life really went off the rails. And psychologically, I mean, looking back, I was in my own head, I was like, oh, I'm not taking this very well, but I'm sure I'll get through it. Looking back, I was pretty mentally ill. I was not well at that time. I think I'd actually at points started bordering over into psychosis at times. So I was having a bit of a break with reality. Such was the extent and the power of the flashbacks I was going through. And I simply resolved to heal it forever. I had this decision inside of my mind that I would never, ever go through it again. That I'd spend the rest of my days single, living as a monk if need be. But I never, ever wanted to go through that again, because I'd already been through it 4 or 5 times. And every time it seemed to be slightly worse. The explosions seemed to have more of a concussive impact on every single system in the rest of my life. So I'd resolved to fix it. At the same time as that, I was actually mobbed by a group online of self-defense instructors who I was working with, collaborating with, many of whom I look back now, and they're classic megalomaniac psychopaths. But I couldn't see it, because I was a precious little lamb to the slaughter, like all black sheep are. We're trained for abuse. Yeah. So things went really badly. I noticed in my business and in myself that there were many men were training to develop fighting skills to protect their physical boundaries, and they really didn't need that. They actually were fine. They were about as trained up as a human being can be for the kinds of threats that they're likely to face. And most of my client base wasn't at high risk. Very, very few people were. So I was like, this is symbolic. This is not, the psychologist in me rather than the martial artist in me was saying, this is symbolic. This is not really about what it seems to be. It was another martial artist called Jeff Thompson, a big hero of mine since I was a child. He was talking in an interview, and he said that he felt the martial arts were kind of repetition complex. And many martial artists, like many bodybuilders and powerlifters, are actually the victims of childhood abuse. And they're trying to post hoc and in a not very effective, direct way, put systems of protection in place so they'll never be the victims of abuse again. So I was looking at that. I was looking at myself. I was like, what's wrong with me? If I'm on the door of a nightclub and 6 guys walk up and they're high and they're drunk and I know their faces and they're criminals, who beat the living poop out of security guards regularly, I can laugh. And I would legitimately laugh. I would just be like, I don't care. And that was a strength I had in that world, was I just didn't care. But if it came to me having an argument with a girlfriend, I couldn't say no. The word no would make me shake. It would make me sweat. Sometimes it would make me cry just saying no to somebody. And I was like, this is insane. I can't live with this huge disparity. So I started to look at ego boundary breaks. And I was like, okay, let's look at people pleaser syndrome. So the first step into the Spartan Life Coach was me looking at people pleaser syndrome and why we struggle to say no. And I did that. That was mainly sold to the Street Fight Secrets people, men mainly. They loved it. And then I started to talk about it on YouTube. This is the very short version of the story. Mm-hmm. And the Daughters of Narcissistic Mothers, which sounds like a society. It isn't. There's just a lot of them. There you are. There's a paid up member that everybody can see. So the Daughters of Narcissistic Mothers came to me in droves. Maybe a good psychologist can figure out why women would want to come to a man who's a self-defense instructor when their problem wasn't with a man, it was with a woman. But for whatever reason, that was the Spartan Life Coach project leapt from 500 subscribers to 5,000 subscribers in the space of 4 or 5 months, simply because I started to talk directly to women who were the daughters of narcissistic mothers. And then that I didn't realize at first, but then I slowly realized how this fit with porous ego boundaries, concepts I had learned before when I was helping women with their women's self-defense. And I was trying to answer the question, why do women get back with abusive men? So I looked at trauma bonding. I looked at cult psychology. I'd studied psychopaths before because of the criminal element that I needed to understand for the self-protection world. It all just kind of came together. It was organically sort of came together. And I decided for a year to just talk to people rather than at people. So I didn't do videos where I taught them life coaching. I would answer questions that people had written me either on the forum or on the YouTube comments. And I would just converse. It just became a tool of conversation. And that worked really well. And then I started to study narcissism in more detail. Now I should say, I'm really giving you a very long answer here, but I'll wrap it with this. I should say back in 2009, 2010, I did look at narcissism online and narcissistic abuse. My initial feeling was one of elation. I was like, oh, this is what I've been experiencing. This is what it is. But I was so put off by the online narcissism community and the sometimes, the cult-like, it just gave me a very strange, creepy sensation. I had the feeling like a lot of people who were involved in that actually were a little bit sick themselves and were deriving some sort of sadistic glee from chatting about narcissistic abuse. And it put me off so strongly that I was like, no, it's not real. My psychology background, the way I was trained, was we didn't believe in personality disorders. It doesn't exist. So that was bad for me. That was a real barrier for me. As time went by, I became convinced, looked at the research. I listened to people I didn't really want to listen to. I took on new information. I do read the academic papers that are out there. Some of them are total garbage and some of them are brilliant. I've developed this reputation of being anti-establishment. I'm not really. There's a lot of psychotherapy and psychiatric models that I think are absolutely bang on the money. So it developed and developed and developed to that. In more recent times, I've developed a relationship, not just with Dana of Thrive After Abuse, who gives great quality information, but also with Sam Vaknin. I collaborate with him. I've got a seminar coming up with him in Liverpool in a couple of weeks. And that's a quick tour of what happened up to today, a very rapid tour.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You touched on so many things within that I can not only relate to, but respond to. I too, one of the moments that I really recognized my codependency was in having trouble saying no and noticing, like, just even as recent as this year, saying no to setting a boundary with a man who I just wanted to be friends with rather than romantic with. And I noticed as I was texting, not any sort of traumatic confrontational thing at all internal, my heart was pounding, shaking, and I was noticing, like, where is this coming from? Why do I have such a reaction to setting a boundary? And I think that in learning about our boundaries, whether they exist, whether they've been punished, whether they've been, not allowed, we begin to internalize that and disallow boundary setting ourselves. And it seems to me that that's a issue throughout the whole cluster B. I mean, I'm no psychologist, but from what little I've studied, it seems to be that boundary setting, we're similar, me speaking as a codependent, similar to narcissists in the sense that we both have poor boundary setting functions, and that we do sometimes look for external, like your martial arts guys, look for external boundaries and overdo it to try to protect what's in, if we don't see that it's really a psychological boundary that we're so weak within. So it's fascinating to watch that.
There's a thing that happens, split by genders. Generally, women will tend towards spiritual bypassing. So they'll go into spirituality, the new age, and mysticism to bypass the genuine trauma because it's just too awful. Men go into this kind of live action role play where they get to dress up like ancient Japanese warriors and they speak a foreign language. And it's also a kind of spiritual bypassing. It's like, it's a symbolic ritual that we tell ourselves is making us safe. But deep down inside, we know it really isn't, because it can't. And that happens both ways. There are men who go in spiritual bypassing, and many women who go into the martial arts as well, of course. Mm-hmm. But it serves the same psychological function at its root.
Yeah, there's so many coping mechanisms. And I can relate to that myself. And I think sometimes we're just searching in the dark for what makes sense. How do we make sense of it all? How do we, and that kind of actually ties in with something that I've been interested in that you're talking about, which is coping mechanisms, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how that shows up.
Sure, I will do. There's one thing that we touched on that I need to cover because for the sake of the listeners, it can be confusing. When we are talking about boundary setting, we're not just talking about external boundary setting. People with weak boundaries, whether they are narcissistic predators or codependent prey, also have an inability to set boundaries with themselves. They have very, very weak inhibition, like self-inhibition. And that is what leads us into addictive cycles. Mm-hmm. Narcissists get narcissistic supply from abuse. Codependents, or the victims of narcissists, get their own kind of supply. If you wanted to put it in really crude terms that don't really fully function, but to give people an idea, it's a sadomasochistic relationship. It's a predator-prey relationship that we're addicted to. The most important boundary you can set is with yourself. It's when you feel the urge as a codependent, empathic victim to overgive when somebody's needing something. That's what needs to be guillotined before you actually go through it, and to see that as an addiction. So you asked about the coping mechanisms. Yes, usually the flight, freeze, fight, and fawn response are usually referred to as trauma responses, but you're right, they are coping mechanisms. They are a way of mitigating, in certain senses, uncomfortable emotion. In Pete Walker's excellent book, CPTSD From Surviving to Thriving, in some senses, they're a way of controlling love, and they're a way of controlling compassionate, loving energy that we should have received from our parents, but for one reason or another didn't, or we received it sporadically. So we develop certain coping mechanisms and certain trauma responses that are based on birth order, that are based on the type of abuse we faced, that are based on how our parents treated us, and that fall into those 4 categories. I don't know if you want me to break them down, or...
If you're interested, I can definitely identify that I fall quite often into the fawn or the flight. Occasionally the fight or the freeze will come out, but it's interesting to notice where we are at. If you notice that you're in a relationship with an emotional manipulator, it would be interesting to self-reflect and see what are your strategies, what are your coping mechanisms. But I would absolutely love to hear. I don't know if it's too much of a spoiler for the seminar. People should really go to that.
No, it's absolutely fine. I think I would just say that you raised a good point there, that people should learn what their primary and secondary trauma response is. They should understand what CPTSD and emotional flashbacks are. Of course, we all do all of them. My primary is fight. My secondary is fawn. but I also will flight and I also freeze. I do have a problem with dissociation. As I'm studying myself and my own trauma, which is what we are forced to do. We're not given the consent to not do that if we want to live something approximating a normal, healthy life. I've noticed that it depends on the stimulus. It depends on what kind of scenario I'm facing. In my own progress recently, I've noticed that in a situation where things are very, very unfair and I'm presented with a double bind, I actually will not fight and I do not fawn. I freeze. I just start to blank it out. And therefore, I don't get on very well with institutions and organized sort of groups. And I've been self-employed since I was 23. I don't think I could go back into it anymore because I simply cease to function. If I see something that is unfair, I just go into like a sort of a shutdown mode. And it's I think Pete Walker calls it the Abandonment Depression. And I just switch off. Where other people would maybe fight and say something, I'll just be like, and just switch off and walk away from it. It's very important that we develop that kind of relationship with ourselves where we can compassionately view these neurotic, unconscious, enforced patterns of behaviors and not stop them dead, not try and over control them, but work with them. Bring a bit of loving awareness to that space, just sort of acknowledge, I never really had a choice but to do this because I was faced with situations as a child that a child should have been protected from by his parents, not had inflicted upon him or her by their parents. It's a complete perversion of the way the world's supposed to work. And you do end up with these strange ways of interacting with other people and strange ways of coping with stress. You just mentioned one of them before, which is the capacity to say no to somebody when they're giving you unwanted attention.
Yeah, I mean, just two responses to things you've said just now too is I can really relate to having trouble with sort of overt structures or government or job, or I too have a real resistance and struggle with people who know me laugh because they say you should work for yourself, which I do now, but I too would have a strong reaction to that. And I think two things is that the importance of self-compassion when we discover that we're going through these things. There is so much shame. There is so much just confusion, trying to understand things, almost pity for oneself. But I think the employing self-compassion is such an important thing, as well as humor. And then I also liked to respond to what you said about the double bind. I love George Orwell and how he brings up this sort of kind of highlights how one can be put in a double bind, and also how when there's so much to unpack in terms of thoughts, how thoughts create actions, how actions create experience, how our attention is focused on, creates those thoughts, allows them our words and then actions. So there's a lot in there. I don't know which direction you'd like to go in, but there's so much that can be said about this.
I would say on the point that you just made, I went to see 1984 as a play in London just last month. I've been touting 1984 for years. I've been saying people should listen to this. It's great. It's fantastic. I watched the play from beginning to end and I was blown away by how much I'd forgotten. And just how, there's no other phrase for this, but it's become meaningless because it's overused, how very ahead of his time George Orwell was.
Incredibly and absolutely.
So I would challenge anybody now, as they're listening to this, to open up a new window, go onto Google, find 1984 online, pick any passage at random, read it, reread it, and then remember, he wrote that in 1949. Yeah. In 1949. And as far as I know, he didn't have a time machine.
Yeah.
So I don't know how, he was, people, like futurologists, the people who study socioeconomics, were not doing as good a job of what would happen in 2016 back in 1990 as he did in 1949. It's insane. Yeah. The words from the book, you'll, I don't know what people in 1949 must have thought of that. They must have thought it was completely bewildering and totally, out. They had just gone through World War II, But my goodness, I mean, it's really, watching the play again, it really shook me to my core. You know, we now live in a world where we've been talking about how much we should torture people for years now.
Yeah.
Me and you, the last 10 years, we've lived in societies where we don't say, is it okay or not to torture? Of course not. The English banned the rack back in 1600s.
Right.
Now we say, well, you know, yeah, but how much? You know, should you, you know, flay their skin or just half drown them? Or and you're, you know, watching 1984, and it's depressing in some senses, but it was actually also it's good. People should look at it. It's ugly, it's harsh, but people should look at it.
Well, because in some ways we're all sort of like the Winstons of the world. You know, there is sort of this building. I love what he said. He's got this essay called The Politics of the English Language, where it really is like a watering down of thought, even with the words that we use, you know, good, double plus good. And there's almost a consideration of like, well, what do the other guys think so that I can think the opposite, where the content really gets lost. And we're also, I think you mentioned this in recent videos, that we all get so reactive that there's no actual time to reflect. There's no time to become calm, to go out in nature, to go have real experience, which actually does replenish us, does refill us. It becomes this heightened reactive sense, which reminds me of sort of the interaction with being an emotional manipulator or emotional you know, a narcissist, where we almost get addicted to that fight or flight reactive state. And I'm hopeful that we don't forget, you know, the beauty, the calmness that life actually offers us when we're not in this. We actually can remove ourselves from that.
Well, the book, O'Brien says to Winston when he's torturing him in the book very directly, we will destroy that Winston. When Winston goes to first have sex with his girlfriend, they do it in the countryside. She takes him out of the city to a tree in the countryside, and they meet in a place that's outside of it. And at one point in the book, O'Brien tells Winston, all of that will end. We will crush love. We will crush intimacy. We will wage war on the orgasm. 1949, this guy's saying it. We'll wage war on the orgasm so that you people can't get together and feel intimacy and feel love and feel happiness in a way that we don't control, that we can't tax, that we can't have a say in. Will be in your bedrooms. And when they're caught in bed. Yeah. The O'Brien and the system that he represents breaks in and catches them in the bedroom. And that's where they take them. I think all of these things are very, very significant and very, very predictive of what's happened. The only difference is that it's happened in a very soft way.
Oh yeah, it's always be gentle. It will never be, you know, there's that image of the soft boiled frog where it's always subtle. And so you never know. But I mean, call me an optimist, but I truly do believe in the power of the things that are real. You know, like, you know how they say the best things in life are free. It's like love, nature, beauty, you know, all the fresh air, all those things. They can try to consumerize and capitalize and make us addicted. But ultimately, just like any addict, I mean, I can relate to this in terms of being addicted to, you know, the narcissistic abuse, having woken up and graduated myself through awareness, through study, that I think it really becomes a choice. And I think it's a matter of how much do we want to surrender to the TV, the social media, any of the things that keep us sort of disconnected or distracted, or I'll even say soft in the sense, because it really doesn't require any participation. How much do we value our lives, essentially?
I think the mistake that's been made is they've overdone it. The mistake that's been made is they've pushed the slaves too hard. Yeah. They've pushed the slaves to the point where slaves are now saying, hey, let's put on a play of 1984. It's as relevant in 2016 as it ever was. And then people on YouTube are getting together and talking about it exactly as we are. And it's relevant. And everybody listening to it goes, holy shit, we're living 1984. Yeah. We're just living a soft version of it. So in an ideal slave camp, you would give people more for their work. You would keep them you would keep them, you'd have an agitation line. I would, because I have a background. I studied sales and marketing for years. My father, a total psychopath, forced me to. He pushed books into my hand when I was 11, 12, 13 years old because he wanted to groom me. He thought that I would make him money for the rest of his life. So I know that in order to get people to consume and obey, you need them not calm. You need them not sat in nature, just having a good time and looking at the stars. You need them agitated. You need them provoked. If you want them to be motivated to vote to go to war, they have to be agitated and provoked with a sense of there must be something to be done. So I'd have an agitation line and I'd be like, guys, the people in the marketing, the media, the politics, I'd get them all together and I'd say, don't cross the line. If you cross the agitation line, you're going to force people to wake up because they'll just spew. They'll just say, well, what are we doing? What's this all for? Why am I giving my entire life away? Why should I bother to follow all these rules and jump through all these hoops? What's the payoff for me? Pain is an awakening force. That was the original message of Buddhism. The core message of Buddhism is very scientific. It reflects the OODA loop: observation, orientation, decision, and action. Observation is, I am in pain. When you're not in pain in the womb as a fetus, you have no individuation. You're not aware of anything. The first thing you're aware of that brings you into individuation is pain, is the cold, is the being slapped on the arse by the doctor. So pain actually becomes this accidental. You can use pain to control people. You give them too much, you're going to wake them up. And that's what they've done. They've gotten whoever took over the controls of this machine, the children of the people who designed the machine, they've been sloppy and they've been greedy and they've just overdone it now.
Yeah, because when you turn it up too much, it becomes like a wave that crests, and there comes a point where you can build and build and build and build, try to draw out as much from people as possible. But there does come a point at which someone quits that job or the wave crests and it dissolves. So
we're there, and that's where the optimism comes from.
Oh, absolutely.
7 years ago, all my friends work in corporate jobs, IT, finance, petrochemical industry. When I would bring up 9/11 and conspiracy theories, they would shout me down. 6, 7 short years later, everybody takes it as a given that it was an inside job. They're just like, yeah, it was an inside job. I was like, 7 years ago, I was demonized for saying this. And now everybody's like, no, we know it was. And some people, cynics would say, yeah, but what are they doing about it? They're not doing anything about it. I would say, give people a chance. Let them catch up. Nobody wants to be told when they've given their whole life to an infrastructure and to a taxation system that is criminal, that goes out to build empires based purely on suffering and pain, is something that they're funding. Of course, they're going to fight that. But in the face of ongoing, blatant evidence, of course, they're going to cave. Again, challenge to anybody watching this, go back and watch the videos of the planes crashing the buildings. The year 2000 is a long time ago. Technology's come a long way. We're all very used to CGI nowadays. When you're seeing something. It's like watching the special effects of the 60s. It looks crap. Go and watch the planes hitting the Twin Towers. It's crap. It's total garbage. You will be shocked that anybody would put that out. You'd be like, if I was in charge, I'd be like, guys, go back and do that again. That is sloppy, real sloppy work. Do it again. Do it properly. So, we've switched tack here. We're talking about something else now.
Okay. I'm totally okay. I actually feel like it's relevant because I think that things. There's a Hegelian model that says, as things arise, maybe the total system is at the point of collapse and breakdown, just like we saw with Rome, just like, where it can go so far and then its antithesis arises. And then those two slowly battle it out, slowly, work against one another as polar opposites until they synthesize and bring about a new thing. So I'm actually very hopeful as I see this thing crumbling, seeing what is it going to be in its next iteration? What is going to be the life that springs up and comes about as we become more, I think it's really just an evolution of awareness.
It is an evolution of awareness. There is a great potential for catastrophe here as we look down the barrel of your next two potential presidential candidates in America. Unbelievable. 4 years ago, it would be like, stand-up comedians, I follow stand-up comedy very closely in America, are complaining that it's too easy to make jokes about it because it's so absurd. Hillary Clinton is a cartoon. Donald Trump is a cartoon for 4-year-olds. I mean,
Totally.
so, but it is becoming, it's still at the microcosmic level. It could be a parent to child. It's narcissistic abuse. Correct. It's deception. It's enslavement, which then plays out with a partner. Now we're seeing it at a global, state, national level. Who controls the narrative? There's a lot of that in 1984. The whole point, well, one of the major points is who controls the narrative. At one point, O'Brien says, sorry?
I just said, who's the number one? It's a prisoner reference.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know if you remember in the book, Winston's job is actually wiping people out from history. That's his job. Right. Anybody who's a dissident, he makes them an unperson. He just clears them out. Right. And at one point, he's talking about an uprising, and O'Brien says to him, "Are you aware that uprising took place?" And he says, "Yes." So he gives him an electric shock, and he says, "Are you aware the uprising took place?" He says, "Yes." He says, "How do you know? There's no record of it." He's like, "Well, in memory, I know this there." It's about burning out the circuitry in people's brains, and this is exactly what happens in narcissistic abuse. You isolate the target, you completely disturb their pattern of reality, and you totally control the narrative. But why do people leave narcissistically abusive relationships? Because they go too far. They overplay their hand. They take you above the agitation line where you're like, fuck it, I'm ready to kill myself. So what are you going to do? Well, like, what's your next threat? What's your next level? I'm so crazy now. I'm in so much pain. I want to be dead. What are you going to threaten me with next? And there is nothing. And that's how people eventually escape, because it goes too far. I look at my last relationship with trepidation, and I think, what if she scaled back? What if she actually had the sense to scale back? Right. I'd still be with her.
I would still stay too. Absolutely. That's the fascinating thing. I mean, I almost feel like when you're talking about having gone too far, like, to me, that almost seems like the state that ISIS is in. They just don't care anymore. So it becomes about destruction. But if, for example, someone is in a relationship that is abusive, but it's comfortable enough, we see this like even people in their jobs. If you keep them comfortable enough, you can squeeze them, like you said, more 12 hours instead of 8. You can, as long as they still get to go home to their beds at some point, they'll find that point of greatest return. But I think it's almost a blessing of being pushed too far, because that does create the wake up moment. That does create the search for other options moment.
And it's a poor job as well. It's a lazy job. Like what they've done with ISIS is a very lazy job. They knew that they needed to create barbarians at the gate. And the reason that they had to create ISIS is because none of us believed in Al-Qaeda anymore. Everybody, a lot of people knew Al-Qaeda meant the database of CIA assets from Afghanistan who were there to fight the Russians. That was like common parlance at dinner parties. Everybody knew who AQ was. You can't keep frightening people with CIA assets. What should we have now? And then ISIS springs out from nothing, from nowhere. Yeah. People started reporting it, and I was like, why are they talking about an Egyptian goddess like in the Levant?
That's what I thought initially too.
So what? There's a hairdressing salon down the road from where I used to live when all that came out. It was called ISIS. It only did African women's hair. And it's still there. They've kept the name, God bless them. Like, they're hanging in there. It's the ISIS salon, and it's all in black. Like the logo was all black, and they haven't changed a thing. But they had to make these cartoonishly evil barbarians, and they absolutely went too far. It was ridiculous. I don't think nobody really knows what's going on, but they know that we're not getting the truth. They look at the ISIS execution videos with their high levels of production, funny lighting on people's faces, and they're like, I don't know what I'm watching, but I don't feel like I'm watching what they're telling me I'm watching.
Yeah, and that's one thing that the human eye, I think, is especially gifted with. I mean, even there are some now high-resolution animated characters that can even speak in YouTube channels. We've seen those. And my first reaction in seeing that, it's so close of an approximation, but it's creepy. And you can have this sort of visceral reaction to something when you know it's not true. We even know that when we get even with like the narcissists or the emotional manipulators, we can feel that something's not right because it's not authentic. I mean, it almost goes back to the, what's the movie Blade Runner, where the things that are authentic become the most valuable, where we as humans with hearts, with minds, with senses can actually pick up on things, even though we might be being fed and being used to, the program, the simulation, whatever it might be.
Have you heard of the uncanny valley effect?
No.
Uncanny valley is a term, I think the Japanese researchers came up with it when they were looking at creating artificial intelligence and lifelike dolls. And you can actually plot a graph, and there's a valley on the graph that is like, when we hit this point of lifelikeness, like if I show you a robot that's like a kid's robot with the big eyes and a grill for a mouth and it goes, hello, how are you? You're not freaked out.
Yeah.
But when these new dolls and robots that they're coming out with now kind of look at you and blink, there's this uncanny valley effect. It's too close. Sam Vaknin wrote about it when talking about the artificial intelligence that narcissists represent. Narcissists, true NPDs, a true NPD can give you that uncanny valley effect where you look and you go, it looks human, it's telling me it's human, but I'm not feeling like that thing.
It's not there. There's nothing behind it that I'm connecting with. Yes, absolutely. In fact, my experience of being with a narcissist was that there was this emptiness. And I kept experiencing, that was actually one of the tip-offs for me, was this emptiness around me. And I was seeing the whole Wizard of Oz production. I was seeing the lights in the show, and I was all in. But when I really sort of sat with myself, I thought, what is this emptiness I'm experiencing? I don't know if it was bringing up mine because the reflection in the mirror, or but it's a fascinating thing. Once you get too close, you can really sense and feel that. Absolutely.
I would suggest as a potential road of investigation to consider that the emptiness is what the narcissist does not do. So Dana, Thrive After Abuse, says the red flags of narcissistic abuse are not seen, they're felt. One thing you'll feel with that emptiness is your brain is, in the book by Malcolm Gladwell, Blink, he calls it thin slicing. So the brain and the unconscious mind actually look at a person and they snapshot it and they go, what's this person all about? And they try and map the intentions, the movements, the behaviors. There's an emptiness. The emptiness there is no sincere, a congruent effort. So you're often with somebody with MPD, you'll be going, a normal person wouldn't do that. Yeah. And if a normal person did that, a normal person would follow that with this.
Right.
And where's the this?
Right.
It's just empty. It's just silence. There's just space. And you go, why aren't you, where's the neck? Like, if you were what you were pretending to be, this is called the Turing test. When you're talking to artificial intelligence, the Turing test, you know that one? Yeah. If you could speak to a robot over the phone and think it's a human, it's passed the Turing test. It's real. They fail the Turing test. They fail the Turing test all the time because you're sat there going, what? Like, your mom just died.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or, my mom just died. Yeah. And you're not crying, or you're not upset and you don't care. You're continuing to watch TV or read your book. So, though they're very good in some senses at modeling what normal behavior looks like the replicants in Blade Runner did in order to survive alongside humans, if you haven't got it, you haven't got it. What are you supposed to do? You can only learn.
Reaction, or not. Yeah.
So it's just a series of stimulus and response where you go, I think a human in this situation would act that way, but you've got to drop the ball every once in a while. You can't be on game 24/7. Right. Where a normal human being is just responding authentically. These replicant types, the true NPDs, the severe NPDs, they have to make a cognitive effort to do it. And if they forget, you will just see the robot, nothing.
Right. And that's when the mask slips. It's sort of like they're normally very good at being actors and, we buy in. But when that mask slips, we see, okay, they're not really sort of filling in the whole picture. They're not filling in, not all the colors are there. And we can pick up on that, maybe not consciously, but we do feel that. And so that's an interesting thing. I mean, I think one other thing I'd like to ask you about is it's fascinating to me how with the election, we see narcissism with our culture. And I think you had said correctly that we can become too obsessed with it to the point where there's this weird sort of narcissism thing instead of focusing on ourselves. I think that gets scary too and creepy, where the codependents are actually trying to sort of do what narcissists do, is do all this projection and say it's over there, the problem is over there. I think that it almost seems like it's a newer concept. I feel like we're seeing more and more of it, but yet the Greeks, the ancients, Ovid, really had this story of Narcissus and Echo, and to have that sort of insight to the T, it tells me that it's maybe not a modern psychology construct, that it can, perhaps it's an archetype, perhaps this thing existed from time. I don't know. It's a question I wonder about.
So I'm a nerd for some subjects, and I'll nerd out on psychology and philosophy and martial arts and strength training. I can read strength training articles all day. They help me go to sleep at night. Another thing I love looking at is history, but I'm 38 and I've been I sucked at history at school. I hated it. And then I got switched onto it when I was 25, 26. I didn't realize what the Greek influence on the world was. I had a good education. I was lucky. I was sent to private schools, and we did have a Greek class, but the guy was kind of a bit, anyway, he was a real character, but nobody really impressed upon me the influence. Now, Greek thought might be behind pretty much all of your major, this is going to wind people up and I don't want to digress too much, might be behind all of your major world religions. There was even a period of history of Greco-Buddhism, which I only found that out about 2 months ago. There's actually statues that are Greco-Buddhist. These people were getting together and putting the information together. So the idea that the Greeks had it, I think they probably had everything at one time. I think there was the one empire, the one culture that actually had the whole thing, and everything else that we look at that we see as being foreign to that, or from a different part of the world, or from a different, there's not much that wasn't encompassed by the Greeks. So the fact that they had this covered, I mean, if you go, the Spartan life coach originally was based very much on Stoic philosophy. Right. If you go and study the Stoics and the Cynics, they're saying they were saying thousands of years ago, what I'm saying now. Don't get stuck in materialism because it will make you sick. It will make you sick. Forgo it. Study, they called it virtue. They said, be focused on virtue, and then you'll be healthy and happy, and you will be aligned with nature. Now, if I say to you alignment with nature, you'd think that was Taoism. Well, actually, the Greeks were saying it for as long as the Taoists were saying it. Align yourself. There was this idea of the superior human being, the superior man, the superior woman aligns herself with that which is, aligns herself with the forces of nature, doesn't work against it. So yeah, the fact that Greeks had Narcissus and Echo down, not that big a surprise.
Yeah, no, it's interesting what things are eternal, or what themes, essentially, as we align ourselves with what is good and true, aligning ourselves with truth, and not that external superfluous. To me it echoes like a lot of religious terms, or anything that is about improving the self, living an honest, honorable life. There is that alignment with things that are good, things that are, and good, evil, those, it's tough not to get relativistic these days, but when something's honest, when something's true, when something's
it's not tough to not get relativistic. It's actually, if you just turn that switch off, which is what would other people think about what I'm saying right now, and the fear of like social justice warriors chasing you down because you use the pronoun he instead of her, or some crazy, we know in our hearts that all of that is lunacy.
Totally.
It's noise. It doesn't mean anything. It's coming from very mentally sick people, emotionally very disturbed people who want to push that out onto others. What does that sound like? Oh, I think we have a word for that.
I know.
You might have heard of those people before. They rejoice in the chaos they cause, and they rejoice in the fact that you can't just sit there on your bench and say, I know how this is. And there's no relativism, because what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong, and here's good and here's evil, and it's really straightforward. It's only perverts, and I mean that not sexually necessarily, people who want to pervert the natural way, who promote a narrative. No. What's evil to you might not be evil to me. What? No. It's all nonsense. And I challenge anybody who's watching this, come at me, bros. You can get me on a live Google Hangout. Tell me something that you think I think is evil that isn't evil. And I've had this kind of debate with people before. They'll go, in Africa, when young men are initiated, this is what they have to do to the older men. And in your country, it's this. And in that country, it's that. And I'm like, I can give you good reasons why that will or will not work, why that will cause trauma or a happy life.
Yep.
But simple things, circumcision, it's trauma.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
not necessary. Blades don't belong near children's genitals.
Amen.
I think if you can't agree on that and you're going to say that's relativism, I can't help you. I mean, it's real straightforward. Like that which is natural tends to be good. Yeah.
Well, I should say one thing is that anyone who wants to learn more about narcissism, you've got a great opportunity here. There's two of the top experts in the world, Richard Grannon, Sam Vaknin.
For a minute there, I was like, who's she talking about?
Yeah, you and Sam. In my opinion, I think you're among, I'll throw Ross in there as well as others. But great opportunity to learn about this. December 3rd and 4th, is it?
December 3rd and 4th. I just have to say about the expert mantle. Yeah. I was writing like a thing to promote the seminar. And I said, world leading expert Sam Vaknin and Richard Grannon. And he sent me an email back. And he said, it is high time that you accept this title. You are an expert.
Yeah. Sam's saying it, okay. Too, so you may as well take it on. You may as well accept it. But, 2 days, December 3rd and 4th. Is it Liverpool?
It's Liverpool. It's at Liverpool Hope University. Mm-hmm. An aptly named place for it to be. Myself and Layla Lorick are going to be discussing recovery from CPTSD on day one, and then Sam Vaknin and his wife Lydia, his wife coach, as he calls it. They're going to be discussing their relationship on day 2 and letting people ask any and all questions they have about how that functions.
Sounds amazing. Wish I could go, but I'll get to the next one. But anyway, if anyone wants to check that out, I'll put a link up here. And thank you so much, Richard. Such a pleasure, such an honor to just speak with you. And I just want to thank you again.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks. I'm going to stop.